Keep talking it up. Yeah, keep talking it up. Good evening. Welcome to the City of Sugar Land City Council meeting for Tuesday, December the 3rd. In a minute, I'm going to go through the invocation and the Pledge of Allegiance. But before I do that, I'm going to ask everybody to stand, please. And I want to, we're going to have a moment of silence in a minute for one of our longtime employees, but I wanted to kind of set the stage for you. Phil Savko is our Director of Aviation since mid-1988. He literally took over the Sugar Land Regional Airport pretty much after we got it from Doc Hall. And it wasn't, it was one of our best strategic purchases, but there really wasn't much there. Fast forward to where we are now, it's the #1 fixed-based operation in the United States for an airport of our size. We continue to get accolades for the airport. It was under his leadership with his team. I don't see Elizabeth or any of them that are here tonight, but I want to recognize Phil. He passed earlier this week, and recognize him, his family, especially his brother Randy, who has been with him as long as I've been involved with City Council. So if I'd ask you to have a moment of silence to recognize the contribution that Phil Savko made to the City of Sugar Land. Now, if you'll join me in an invocation. Heavenly Father, we thank you for our employees, people like Phil, that every day donate their time, their resources, and in many cases, their lives to protect our citizens and all of us. We thank you for them. We thank you for their service. Father, bless our community. Bless this council tonight as we make decisions that we believe represent the best interest of the citizens of Sugar Land. Bless our county, our state, and our nation as we go forward. I ask a special blessing on our armed forces, the men and women that risk their lives daily to protect the freedoms that we enjoy. Our special forces, Delta, Navy, Navy SEALs, Marine Recon, Air Force Special Forces, those people that are in harm's way every single day. Father, bless them, protect them, keep them safe. Keep our first responders with them and safe. I ask this in your name. Amen. Amen. Join me in the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We've got 2 recognitions tonight. The first, I'm going to ask our Director of Public Affairs, Cindy Dees, and our Director of IT, Vernon Hunt, to come down and join me. And Cindy, if you'd introduce it for us. How you doing?
So Vernon and I are really proud to be here tonight. We've been up here a few times for this exact award, but we're proud to announce that we've actually moved up a spot. So the Center for Digital Government has an award called Digital Cities, and for cities our size, we actually ranked 4th this year. So we're in the top 5. Last year we were 5th, tied for 5th. So we're really, really proud of that. So before I go any further, I want to get all the staff down that help us achieve this award every single year. There's lots of people who make this happen. So if I could get the following people to come down and join me. Jessica Young, Eric Shank, Brad Porter, Robert Bowman, Imelda Bellani, Vernon, you're here, Brian Butcher, James Turner, Rena Varghese, Colin Simbera, Monique Johnson, Mark Hoover, Ray Molly, Alan Veneman, Elizabeth Huff, Ruth Lomer, Jake Schnitzer, Carlos Hernandez, Rick Ramirez, Paula Kuchka, Van Tang, and Jesse Lee. So for those of you that are in the audience, these individuals here are part of our team that make us a digital city here in Sugar Land. And so I want to talk a little bit about how we got this award. So Digital Cities recognizes cities that successfully use technology to improve resident services, enhance transparency, and encourage resident engagement. And so cities that receive this award have shown excellence in these areas. So in our award application, when the judges looked at our award application, they actually judged us on all the information we submitted, which was from all of these people, their departments that stand behind me. And some words that the judges used to describe Sugar Land were open, citizen-centric, collaborative, secure, staff-supported, connected, efficient, resilient, and innovative with use of best practices. So we're very, very proud of all those words that were said about us. Some of the projects that were highlighted were innovative efforts to improve traffic flow through the city, our partnership with Trafficware, increased transparency through our Office of Performance and Accountability, and also elevate our water quality. As you know, we got best tasting water in second best in North America and first in the United States, so that was another achievement that was highlighted. So we're really, really proud of this, and we're just happy to be here to celebrate this.
Congratulations, Cindy. Council, the picture? Let's kind of move everybody back and we'll get everybody together here.
Okay, great. Everyone looking over here, please. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Last one. 1, 2, 3. Great, thank you.
Thank you. Congratulations. So just a little bit to add on to what Cindy said, when you look at the things that we've accomplished with Trafficware, with the pods that we have that govern congestion and mobility, that actually improve that for our citizens, when you look at our social media, the water that Cindy was referencing, we were second. The city that got first, it was actually glacial water. I don't know how you compete with that, but okay, so we got second place, but we really got first. So Cindy, congratulations. Our second recognition is a very special one tonight. We have, I'm going to ask Afshi Chandelier with the Ismaili Center. Afshi, will you come down, please? You want to have somebody come down with you? You didn't know I was going to do that, did you?
I did not, so that was a surprise. It is obviously an honor to be here tonight. I wanted to go to invite the entire Share a Holiday Food Drive team, our Honorary Secretary of the Ismaili Council, Irfanali, Alamalatia, and we have a lot of partners and volunteers and friends. I'm just going to quickly just ask them to come down if they're here. ADC 13, we have Cynthia Cisneros formerly with ADC, if you can please join us. Here we've got the East Fort-Bend Human Needs Ministry. We've got Kim, Vicky, and their board, so please join us. We've got the Honor Roll School. Doris Hina, please come down, and I'll call a few other names. Fort-Bend County, if you are with Fort-Bend County is a sponsor of the food drive. City of Richmond, City of Stafford, Fort-Bend ISD, Stafford Municipal School District, UVH Sugar Land, Fort-Bend Chamber of Commerce, St. Lawrence Catholic Church, Social Concerns Ministry, Skeeter Sugar Land, First Colony Community Services Association, Memorial Herman Sugar Land, Huntsville Grocers, Wholesale Grocers, and our food partners have been Shipley's, Torchy's, and Papa John's. And we have volunteers, so please, all the volunteers, I invite you guys all to be here to share in the recognition. Please join us. Please. Come on. Do I have to come and get you guys? At this time, I'm going to hand it off to Alan, and he will talk more.
Sure, Mayor. Just wanted, on behalf of His Highness the Aga Khan Council for the Southwestern United States, wanted to say thank you as mayor to our district council member, Naushad Karmali, and the entirety of the city council board. We've had the good fortune of getting to know a lot of you over the years, some more recently than others. And we've had a number of events at the Ismaili Jamaat Khan Center. And we choose these events very selectively in the sense that they have to reflect our faith and the faith of the communities. Things like intellectual curiosity. We've had the TEDx for 4 years that the City of Sugar Land is a partner in, a founding partner in, and continues to be. As some of you may know, we do the candidate forums, which some of you may know better than others. Some of you may rather not.
That's always a fun time, isn't it?
But overall, there's also other values like service and quality of life for our community. So it's really important to us that this particular event, the Share Your Holiday Food Drive, not only exemplifies what we as a community can do together, but when we come together in need of the communities around us that might be less fortunate, especially in this holiday season. So
Tell us about that. That's this Friday
that is this Friday.
at the Jamaat Khan.
That is correct, and I think that it's running from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., so much earlier. Yeah, we won't be there at 6.
You'll be there at 10 a.m., but
Exactly. And I know that there are a variety of events and performances. A couple of the school districts is. Yeah. Live TV starting at 9 a.m. And I know for those kids that are home and not in school, there'll be a variety of performances and activities. So you can not only bring your children, but involve them in what is happening and educate them about what we're doing and why it's so important. And Afshi, did I miss anything, or Cynthia?
Yes, we have Fort Bend IC schools, and we have municipal, the Stafford Municipal School. We have a lot of Fort Bend schools performing, so we'd love to get the community out there to support. And as Cynthia said, at 9 a.m., ABC 13 will be live on site, and we'll be doing live shots. We'd love to get the Fort Bend and Sugar Land community, highlighted.
Cynthia, would you like to say something?
Thank you, Mayor.
This is a little bit easier for you. You do this all the time.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, everyone here. As you know, I recently retired from ABC 13 after 30 years, so. But I do want to say that Share Your Holidays, the most important value of that is that all the food collected stays local. So you are literally helping to feed your friends and your neighbors. Being food insecure is something that affects more people than you think, and what a great way to start off the holiday season by helping those who need it most, and with our partners who at every turn say yes when it comes to volunteerism. We are truly a better place, I believe, because of community friends like the Ismaili Jamaat Khan Center.
So you've retired, so now you can move to Sugar Land and run for city council. So we've got a proclamation for the Office of the Mayor. The 39th Annual Share Your Holidays Food Drive to be held this Friday, December the 6th. Whereas AB 13 Eyewitness News' 39th Annual Share Your Holidays Food Drive, benefiting the Houston Food Bank, is being held through December 6th, 2019, and the Ismaili Jamaat Khan Center is a community partner and dropping off location. And whereas the event brings together the entire Sugar Land community with the common purpose of providing food for the less fortunate during our shared holidays, and as a testament to the ethic of service within our communities, the Share Your Holidays Food Drive collected over 51,000 pounds of food last year. And whereas recognized Center, the East Fort Bend Human Needs Ministry, and His Highness the Aga Khan Council for the Southwestern United States support events throughout the year which benefit the city of Chicago. Congratulations. And we look forward to an even more successful food drive. There you go. There's the bar. Can you all kind of come around? We'll get it. Yes, ma'am.
How are you?
All right, great. Everyone look up here, please. And take a couple. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Last one. 1, 2, 3. One more from the
Smile for the lady in the yellow shirt.
Okay, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
Thank you.
One, two, three, looking here. Thank you. One more. Thank you. 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Thank you. Nice. Thank you.
Always a pleasure.
How are you doing? Good to see you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Absolutely. We're going to move on to item number 1, which is the public comment. I will tell you that working with staff these past few days and with members in the community, with the Miriam Islamic Center, we're going to pull item 4E, and that will be placed at a future date on the agenda for action, consideration and action. That will not impact anybody that came here tonight that wishes to speak about that particular action item. I'm not going to pull it until it comes up on the agenda. So if you're here and if you had planned on speaking, you'll still be allowed to speak on that agenda item. And certainly you can speak when it comes back to council for consideration and action in the future. At this time, I'm going to open to public comment. This is for anyone that wants to speak on any of the agenda items that we currently have listed. We have a couple people that have signed up. In a minute, I'm going to call them forward. If you haven't signed a form, that won't prevent you from speaking. You'll still be allowed to come forward and speak, and I'll call for that. The first person to fill out a form is Anthony Baber. Anthony, if you'd come forward, please. He wants to speak on item 4B.
I think we're good. I'll give my time and move on.
Okay. Thank you, Anthony. Ryan Stroll.
Me too.
Okay. Well, that's going to make it easy. Is there anyone else that would like to speak on an agenda item this evening? Okay, we'll go ahead. And before I move to item number 2, I'd like to recognize we have some scouts in the audience tonight. If the scouts could, each one of you could stand and tell us what troop you're with and what badge you're working on. And I had a chance to visit with them earlier this evening, and they are a sharp group, and they are very inquisitive about city government. We might get a couple council members off that visit.
Very good.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So, my name is Raj, and we're working on. So, we're in Pack 18, and we're Den 9, and we're in legal arrow of life.
Okay.
And we're working on the community service stuff.
Here we go. Great. Yes, sir.
My name is Lavon. I'm in Pack 18, Den 12, and I'm there.
There. Thank you.
I'm Aditya. I'm Pack 18, Den 9, and then I'm an arrow of light. We're trying to earn the community upper badge,
Yeah.
building a better world badge. So that's our goal in Scouts.
Thank you. Kind of surprised you guys, didn't I? Well, thank y'all for coming tonight. It's a pleasure. You got one more? Go ahead.
My name is Neva. I'm from Act 18 Gen 9, and we're working at the better world that that's what we can. I'm Gopal. I'm from Act 18 Gen 9, and I'm working on the computer.
Thank you.
I'm a learner in Gen 9. First of all, I'm learning to.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Krishna, and I'm in Act 18, and I'm a boy, and I'm working for a community.
Hi, I'm the delegator for this Day 9, this faculty. I'm really thankful for all the council members, especially Mayor Edmund. He was so kind and he spent a lot of time and answered all the questions. They were asking like smart questions and he was so patient and answering all the questions. Thank you everybody for welcoming us. Thank you so much.
Thank y'all for coming. Item number 2, review the consent agenda. Item number 3 is the consent agenda. The way this will work is we'll take all the items on the consent agenda as one item, unless a council member pulls an item. If they do, we'll take that item separately with a brief presentation, Q&A from staff. Do I have a motion?
Motion approved, Mayor.
Got a motion by Gandhi, second by McCutcheon. You vote at this time, please. And it passes 7-0. Thank you. Item number 4, contracts and agreements. 4A, consideration of an action on authorizing the execution of a construction contract with Allsay Incorporated in the amount of $729,908 for the well rehabilitation project CIP WA 1901. Edward Orozco, our project manager. Edward.
Good evening, Mayor.
Good evening.
And members. For your consideration this evening is the construction contract for well rehabilitation project CIP WA 1901. A little bit of background. The city has 23 groundwater wells rehab annually on a rotational basis to ensure adequate water supply, to ensure superior water quality. The FY19 water well rehabilitation plan includes 3 wells: Woodchester number 4, Sugar Creek number 2, and Greatwood number 1. Design of these 3 wells was completed in October 2019. This project map shows the locations of the 3 wells: Woodchester in the Covington Woods area, the Sugar Creek well number 2 in the Sugar Creek area, and the Greatwood well number 1 in the Greatwood area. So the scope of work includes removal of the well motor and pump, televise the well casing and screens, wire brushing of the well screens, chemical cleaning if required, replacement of pump and motors, replace well column components, and also performance testing of the wells. The bid process, we opened bids October 31st, 2019. 4 bids were received, ranging from $729,000 to $1.3 million. Allsay Incorporated came in with a low bid of $729,908. The engineer's estimate was $750,000. Available budget in CIP WA 1901, $790,000. Needed funds for construction, $729,908. The remaining fund balance will be used for contingency and construction administration. Construction will start with the new year in January 2020. Construction time frame will be 150 calendar days, put in an estimated completion date of June 2020. Construction impacts and notification. So construction impacts, project is on city property and inside fences. No water service interruptions are anticipated. Per the notification plan CO 110, door hangers, mail-outs, one-on-one communications as needed. With that, the recommendation is approval of the construction contract with Allsay Incorporated in the amount of $729,908 for the Woodchester No. 4, Sugar Creek No. 2, and Great Wood No. 1 Water Well Rehabilitation Project, CIP WA 1901. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any clarifying questions.
Questions? Anybody? Do I have a motion? Steve?
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, these going to be done serially or in parallel?
The Great Wood one will be first, and the contractor plans on moving in to do 2 at a time and then take care of the third one. But
Okay.
Great Wood will be first, but 2 will be done immediately starting in January.
Which two?
Great Wood, and he has not confirmed the second location yet.
Okay.
It just depends whichever pumps he receives first.
Okay. All right, thank you very much.
Yes.
Move to approve.
Second.
I've got a motion by Porter, second by Gandhi. Go ahead at this time, please. And it passes 7-0. Thank you, Edward.
Thank you.
Item number 4B, consideration of an action on authorizing the execution of a license agreement by and between the City of Sugar Land and Fort Bend Mountain Bike Association for the use, enhancement, and development of the city's single-track mountain bike trails. We got Joe Cheshire, our Director of Parks and Rec. Joe.
Good evening, Mayor, members of City Council. At the last council meeting, you received a workshop presentation on this item. We're back to cover a couple of items that we wanted to clarify from the last meeting and just kind of recap what the whole agreement is about. The Fort Bend Mountain Bike Association is a Sugar Land-based 501c3 nonprofit, and they were formed primarily to focus on maintaining trails and building new trails in our park system. We've been working with them for probably the last 6 months to put this agreement together. They've been very cooperative in working with us on addressing concerns that we've established to make sure that the communities is well taken care of and the parks are well taken care of and kept safe. So really the goal of this is to have an organization that's recognizable and responsible for developing trails, off-road trails within the park system. The agreement itself is a grant of license, and it's non-exclusive, meaning they don't have exclusive use of the facilities or the parks. The parks are still open to everyone in the public. It gives them the opportunity to come in and do work on these specific trails that are part of the agreement that will be approved as part of the agreement. There'll be an exhibit in the agreement, so it's limited to what is fully recognized within the agreement. The agreement itself is on 1-year term, but with 4 options to renew each year, so basically a 5-year agreement. There are termination clauses in the agreement as well if things don't go as planned. Bicycling is obviously an allowed activity in all of our parks and park systems and throughout the city. And then as part of the Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Master Plan, we did an extensive citizen survey. And most desired facilities by our residents for Parks and Recreation have been trails, and it's continued to see this as a desire of our residents. There's interest in both paved walking and biking trails as well as natural surface trails for hiking and biking within the park system. They came back, as you can see here, our 2 highest requested needs. A lot of discussion was held with the Parks Board on specifically how new trails could be allowed to be developed, and we went into detail about the process that would allow for consideration of new trails. Any new trail or in an existing park or a new trail at a park where no one does not exist currently will go to the Parks Board. The Fort Bend Mountain Bike Association can propose it, lay it out, and we'll look at it and then take it to the board for final approval. If the trail falls within 35 feet of the back of a resident's property, we will contact that resident and let them know about that and get input from them before any approvals or work would take place. So we feel like we have a good process in place to make sure we're protecting our parks and our residences. And then if there's a modification or just a reroute, sometimes that happens after a storm, the organization will flag it, staff will go out and look at the reroute and then determine whether it's approved or not. And again, the same 35-foot proximity to a residence falls in line with that. The routes currently that we would be looking at approving as part of the agreement, they're identified as in exhibits as part of the agreement, are the Brindley Trail, which has been in existence for over 10 years now, Brazos River Park Trails, River Park Trail, and the Oyster Creek Park Trail. The Parks Board held 4 different meetings and workshops on this item to review and provide input on development of this agreement. At their November 12th meeting, the board voted 6-1 to approve the agreement and make a recommendation to City Council for consideration and action on the agreement. At the last council meeting, there were a couple of questions that were raised that needed a bit more research on our part, and so we went back and brought back the answers for you tonight. The first one had to do with an impact on workers' compensation premiums. The volunteer work here, they will have to sign up with Serve Sugar Land Volunteer Program, and as part of that, they will be covered under workers' comp by the city. We've talked to the budget office and risk management on that, and they estimated that it would cost less than $100 a year to add this group to our policy on that. We use the example of, say you had 40 workers working 10 hours a year, 400 hours. They said that would come in at less than $100. I think the number was about 55. So we could probably double that number of volunteer hours and really not have much of an impact at all. Another question that had to do with the enforcement of the agreement was basically who was the responsible party for enforcing the agreement. The city and Parks Department and staff will be responsible for enforcing the agreement if there was a group, say a group not associated with Fort Bend Mountain Bike Association, not part of this agreement, came in and started building trails. We're not wanting the Fort Bend Mountain Bike Association to become the one to enforce that. We would ask that they would contact us the next business day, identify what has occurred, and let us, the city, manage any unapproved work that's being done out there. We look to the Fort Bend Mountain Biking Association to primarily be a voice of the community, try to through social media and just working with bicycle enthusiasts, sort of educate them on what the appropriate approach to any trail work is through their organization and through the city. And so if road trails were built, we don't want them to go and physically or verbally try to stop it. They can try to educate them, but best just to pass it on to the city staff to manage any sort of enforcement of the agreement. And then we also added, so there were two sections here in Section 7 that were added specifically to address that issue with this language that's held in here. And then also in Section 19, it specifically says there's no enforcement authority given to the Fort Bend Mountain Biking Association to encounter or kind of direct other users of the parks or trails. So with that, staff is requesting approval of the license agreement for the use, enhancement, and development of the city's single-track mountain bike trails between the City of Sugar Land and the Fort Bend Mountain Bike Association. Be happy to answer any questions.
Question? Carol.
Thank you, Mayor. I was reading the agreement again, and I just out of curiosity on paragraph 4F, 3 and 4, it talks about how heavy equipment can be used with approval, such as chainsaws, a mini excavator, and a front end loader. And it says operator must show that he or she has prior experience operating that equipment. What's an example of, I guess, documentation that shows that someone's got prior experience using that particular type of heavy equipment?
If it was related to work-related, if they were in some sort of construction industry or where they were an engineer or dealt with some aspect of construction work and could prove that they were involved in that. So I think there's a number of ways that we could confirm that they were involved in an area that would give them the knowledge and the understanding. We also ask in here that they meet ANSI, which is American National Standards Institute standards for being able to operate this equipment. So there are standards that are set that we can make sure that they meet.
Okay, and then we got an email from a resident a couple of hours ago that was forwarded to staff suggesting that the city allow the very advanced technical features everywhere except at Oyster Creek, and at Oyster Creek have them a little more limited because of a lot of children and more of a family environment. What is staff's thoughts on that particular comment?
On the agreement specifically states as far as any sort of feature that would be built. When I talk about a trail feature, it's generally it's either a small ramp or some element that could be ridden on. The Fort Bend Mountain Bike Association is required to submit drawings and specifications, actual set of building plans and documents for the city to review and approve before this work would take place. And we would certainly take into consideration where that location is, how it relates to other activities going on in the park, and we have the final say of whether we would be open to approving that or not. And then any feature, really, regardless of whether it's difficult or not, we'll have to have what we call a ride around,
right, exactly.
Which would keep people from having to go over any feature. And we have those right now at the Brinley Trail, and we've had them there for many years, and they're very popular, but people don't have to ride on that. They have other opportunities.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll make a motion to approve. I made the motion. Councilman Kermally is the second. You vote this time, please. And it passes 7-0.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. Item number 4, city consideration of an action on authorizing the execution of a construction contract with Matula and Matula Construction, Inc. in the amount of $1,287,826 for the rehabilitation of lift stations at First Colony Commons, number 38, Sartartia, number 403, Campbell Elementary, number 509, and add alternate Trudeau, number 45, CIP WW 1902, and a budget amendment in the amount of $244,000 from the utility CIP fund balance. And we have Guillermo Salcedo, our senior engineering manager, Guillermo.
Good evening, Mayor. Council member. Good evening. Tonight in front of you, for your consideration and approval is a lift station rehab project, CIP WW 1902. A little background on the project. This is an annual lift station program rehab that we have. As you know, we have approximately 134 lift stations within the city. Lift stations are critical for the transportation of wastewater from residential and commercial areas to one of our 4 wastewater treatment plants. This rehab program is based on approximately 25 years of useful life of these lift stations. And the city is being very proactive in the lift station rehab. That's why we do this every year. As you can see, we have the 4 lift stations mentioned before, the First Colony Commons, Sartaria, Campbell Elementary, and Trudeau. And this is a little map showing the location of the 4 lift stations. On the scope of work for this lift station, typically we replace the valves and valve improvements, put new pumps. We do recording on the wet well, SCADA connectivity, and miscellaneous items. The bid package, the bid package was composed in two parts. The base bid was composed with 3 lift stations and an add alternative for 1 lift station. We advertised the bids on September 25th and the 2nd of this year, and we received 5 bids, and we opened in October 17, 2019. As you can see, this is a summary of the bids that we have. The base bid varies from $1 million to 1.5, and the add alternative bid from $200,000 to $350,000 for a total base bid plus alternative from 1.2 to almost $2 million. The low bidders, Matula Construction Inc., and the engineering estimates are about $1.3 million. The available budget at this time for CIP WW1902 is $1.1 million, and the staff recommend the award the base bid and add alternative for $1.2 million. Tonight with us is Mr. Glenn Burt. He's with Matula. He's sitting back there. They're located in Lake Jackson, Texas. They have worked with the city before, and we have a great relation with them. For the construction fund, the base bid plus alternative is about $1.2 million. Contingency $64,391. Construction administration $33,000. For a total funding need is almost $1.3 million. The available budget for this is $1.1 million, and we're asking for additional funds of $244,000. This fund balance, as I mentioned before, is come from the utility fund balance. Again, we'd like to have these additional funds so we can be aggressive in the lift station we have that we do every year. Again, in trying to take advantage of the good prices that we have from the contract. If approved tonight, notice to proceed will be issued this month, December 2018. The substation completion is about 300 calendar days. Construction impacts. The project is all these lift stations are within the city property. No sanitary sewer interruption are anticipated during the construction of this project. And also I want to notice that we have been doing this type of work or this type of project for several years and with a minimal impact to the residents, and very rare we have a complaint from the resident. We're going to follow the policy numbers CO110, door hangers, melt out, and one-on-one communication. And here's the request. The Engineering and Public Works Department recommends that the City Council authorize the execution of a construction contract with Matula Construction Inc. for the lift station rehabilitation project CIP WW1902 in the amount of $1,287,826, and a budget amendment from the utility fund balance in the amount of $244,000. And with that, I will be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Any question? Do you have a motion, Carol?
Make a motion to approve.
Do I have a motion by McCutcheon? Do I have a second? Second. Do I have a second by Jacobson? Vote at this time, please. And it passes 7-0. Thank you, Cameron.
Thank you.
Item number 4D, consideration of an action on authorizing the execution of a contract with Casco Industries, Inc. in the amount of $307,855 to purchase protective equipment for Sugar Land Fire and EMS. We've got Doug Boker, our fire chief. Doug, good evening.
Good evening, Council, Mr. Mayor, and Mr. Bogard. I'm here this evening to discuss briefly a personal protective equipment issue that we have. I want to tell you our current state of affairs is that each firefighter has one assigned set of PPE, the bunker gear that they use to go to fires. When they go to a fire, they either have to wear that gear until the end of their tour to send it out to get cleaned, or if we have a reserve set in stock, we'll put them into a clean set. And we have a limited amount of reserve gear in stock, but even if we switch them into that, it takes upwards of more than 24 hours. What we're proposing to do is buy additional gear with this year's budget to get a second set of gear for each responder. What this does, it'll help us comply with the new state standard. We operate under the authority of the Texas Commission on Fire Protection, and that commission has adopted a few NFPA standards. And with the change in the 1851 standard for next year, the state's interpretation of it, it will double our advanced cleaning and our advanced inspection requirements. So a second set of gear will actually enable us to turn our gear around faster. It will allow a reduced service interruption. So after a first fire, the crews are able to go back to their station rather than go to admin and dig through logistics to find something that fits them. They'll go back to their station and they'll have that gear ready to go for that next call. And finally, and perhaps most important here, is this will reduce our carcinogen exposures to our responders. And I know this council has been very interested and very supportive in our position in the last year as we've addressed firefighter cancers. I know Councilmember Porter has addressed it almost every time that we've seen each other. And so I did add one slide that we can't just buy our way out of this. We can't just buy endless amounts of equipment and have the firefighter cancer problem go away. What we know is that firefighters are 9% more likely to be diagnosed with cancer and 14% more likely to die from it compared to the general public. That in itself is interesting. But when you look at the 11 core cancers, the 11 cancers that the state of Texas has described as presumptive law cancers, that if you get that, it's just assumed you got that at work, that those particular cancers, such as mesothelioma or testicular cancer, firefighters are 200% more likely to catch those cancers than the general public. So what we're doing is actually enacting a best practice approach to this, in addition to just spending a little money to get a second set of gear. Some of these are in place currently, and some of these we're slowly implementing. Scott Herf has taken the role of the ringmaster of this, and this is his project to roll out across operations. We're reinstituting our equipment and truck cleaning days, where one day a week all the equipment comes off the truck, the compartments get scrubbed, all the hand tools get cleaned, and go back on, so we're starting with clean equipment. Second set of auxiliary PPE, I want to commend Chiefs Crespo and Chief Brown on the work they did to change us to a just-in-time inventory philosophy when it comes to accessory gear. That enables us to invest heavier in this bunker pants and bunker coat and use the operations and maintenance budget to supplement our boots, gloves, hoods, and helmets. And what we find is those don't tend to time out. Bunker gear is dated from the day it's manufactured, not the day that it's issued. And so like the accessory gear that makes it the longest is helmets, and only 17% of our helmets actually make it to stale date. So it didn't make sense to include that in just a rotational replacement schedule. So we're going to put that into our O&M budget and handle that with internal efficiencies. Cab decon and no gear zones. We're making it off limits to bring gear into a living quarters of a fire station, and dirty gear will never go into the cab of a fire truck. Gross decon post fires, when they come out immediately prior to coming off air, we'll start with a brush and then we move on to a water decon treated as a hazmat scene. And in hazmat, what we know is time, distance, and shielding increases responder safety. So we want to get the carcinogens off of them prior to them breaking their seals. Then immediately they'll start using wipes in the more absorption skin areas to get the carcinogens off, because they're absorbing these. We're not breathing the carcinogens, now we're absorbing it. Finally, we're going to move to a first in, first out philosophy. So it's always been the first truck to the fire stays for quite a while. We're going to say first truck to get to the fire that did the work is going to go back to the station and clean and get a clean station uniform. Then they'll come back and they're going to put on clean bunker gear and get back to work. And finally, we'll continue our air monitoring to make sure that we don't shift away from the absorption problem back into a respiratory problem. This is the gear we're talking about. This is symbolic of the gear that we currently wear. And it's $307,855, and we'd be purchasing this through a buy board agreement. So the recommendation is to approve the purchase of personal protective equipment in the amount of $307,855. And with that, I'll answer any questions you might have.
Questions? Steve?
Be my pleasure to make a motion to approve this. Thank you, Chief.
Second.
Got a motion by Porter, second by Kermali. Do we have any questions? You vote at this time, please. And it passes 7-0. Thank you, Doug. At this time, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to pull item 4E. That item will be postponed. Item number 5, ordinances and resolutions. 5A, consideration of an action on the City of Sugar Land Resolution number 1940, resolution of the City Council.
Mayor,
Yes.
if you could vote to pull the item, please.
Okay, we'll vote.
I'll second the, maybe a second? I'll second the motion.
I'll make the motion. Carol will second it. I'll beg your pardon?
It's just a motion to the table.
Yes, yes it is. We got a motion, we got a second. Vote this time, please. Hand vote. Here we go. And it passes 7-0. Thank you. Item number 5, ordinances, resolutions. 5A, consideration of an action on the City of Sugar Land Resolution number 1940, resolution of the City Council of the City of Sugar Land, Texas, casting a total of 135 votes out of 5,000 votes in the election of 5 directors to serve on the Board of Directors of the Fort Bend Central Appraisal District for the 2020 to 2021 term. We have Ms. Jennifer Brown, Director of Finance. Jennifer.
Thank you, Mayor. The Fort Bend Central Appraisal District is governed by a board made up of 5 members. The members serve 2-year terms, and the term runs from January 1 of even-numbered years to December 31st of the odd-numbered years. All the board of directors are elected by the taxing entities within the county. So it's the county, the school districts, the cities, and then the conservation and reclamation districts, which are what we call MUDs and LIDs. And so we received the request from the chief appraiser. We reviewed with the Council Finance Audit Committee at their September meeting the proposed nomination. And in October, Council, through Resolution 1933, nominated Jim Key and Al Bronchick as the city's nominees for the ballot. There are a total of 5,000 votes that get allocated, and there's a formula for allocation based on the dollar amount of the property that's appraised and rounding. And long story short, we have 135 out of 5,000 votes, so it's about 2.7% of the total votes. So we're not going to skew the direction of the outcome. But the good news is that there are 5 candidates for 5 seats. I've asterisked the 2 nominees that we had made by as the city council for the city. And the question before you this evening is, how would you like to allocate our 135 votes? The conversation at the Finance Audit Committee was potentially splitting them between our 2 nominees, but that is up to the City Council, and I would leave that to you as City Council to make a recommendation on how to allocate those 135 votes. Upon approving this resolution, we will fill out the ballot and send that back to the Chief Appraiser by December 16th, which is the deadline, and then they will have the Board of Directors sworn in, and they'll begin their term in January. And I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jennifer.
I got a question.
Yep, Ramesh.
So in the past, when this has come up every year, what have we done in terms of the allocation of votes in the prior years?
Typically, we've split them, at least in the years that I've been involved in it, we've split them between nominees or our residents, but it's totally up to you as a city council how you would like to allocate those votes.
I personally, I would split it. I don't see why you wouldn't just split it down the middle.
Yeah, I mean, you've got, we had 2 nominees. Here's what the recommendation was from Finance and Audit. We had 2 nominees. That was Al, that was Jim. Jim actually reached out to me personally and said, hey, I appreciate your support. Al, the same way. They're both known to us. It was our recommendation. We just took it. We took the 135, split it down the middle, and called it good.
67 and 68 would be the allocation if you were to split them between 2 candidates.
Yeah, it's pretty easy. Carol?
Yeah, I know we've done that in the past, but we have a third Sugar Land resident that's on the board. Have we had a third Sugar Land resident as a candidate? Mike Rozelle.
We're in Riverstone,
Greatwood. He's former Fort Bend County judge on the Lit 11. And have we had a situation? And we're in a situation where 5 people running for 5 positions, so every person's going to be elected. And I know that we traditionally split it between the 2 cities of the city's nominees. But have we had a situation before where we've had a third Sugar Land resident be a candidate?
Not that I'm aware.
If I could, I believe the city has always allocated its votes to who you nominated. And since you nominated those 2 individuals, following past practice, you would allocate your votes to those nominated individuals.
And Mr. Rozelle
However
was
you can do it
nominated
any way
by
you
the
want.
reclamation districts. I cannot say that word.
Jennifer, go back a couple slides to where you have the votes.
The breakout?
So, and I know Mike Rozelle personally, he's a personal friend of mine. He got nominated by Muds and Lids. They got 1,260 votes. I doubt he's going to need any of the votes that we do, and that dilutes the 2 people that we have. So, with all due respect, Councilmember, it as you said, this is not one of your most sought-after positions. I mean, the people that actually volunteer for this, got my hats off to them, because it's kind of like working on the school board. You don't get a lot of recognition from working on this. I think, as you pointed out, Councilmember, likely the people that are on this list, based on the allocation of votes that you see here, they're going to get there. So I think we'd be best, I'll make the motion to split the vote between our two candidates. Stewart, did you have a question?
I was going to say that Councilmember Kermali and I, on the Finance and Audit Committee, we kind of hashed this out and came to that conclusion that we wanted to split half and half.
We've got a motion, I've got a second, a competing motion.
No competing motion, Mayor.
Okay. Motion, second, if you'll vote this time, please. And it's 7-0, thank you. Item number 6, public hearings. It's after the hour of 6. 6A, receive and hear all persons desiring to be heard on the creation of reinvestment zone number 2019-03 for a 20.824 acre tract of land located in Sugar Land, Texas, at the northwest corner of the intersection of West Airport Boulevard and Dairy Ashford Road. And we have Ms. Devon is here, and we also have Ms. Alba Pinate, Business Retention. Welcome, Alba. Go ahead, Devin, you're going to introduce her.
Yes, good evening. So as tradition at City of Sugar Land, we introduce our staff members if there's our first presentation to City Council. And so I have the honor of introducing Alba Pinate, who is our Business Retention Manager in the Economic Development Department. She came to us from the Purchasing Department, so apologies to Purchasing, but we are very happy to have her in Economic Development. She has a bachelor's and master's in international business from Houston Baptist University. And so with that, I will introduce Alba to do the presentation.
Alba, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Tonight I'll be presenting the first reading of ordinance number 2183 and the public hearing of reinvestment zone number 2019-03. I first would like to recognize Ben Newell and Dave Lawrence from Transwestern Development Company, who are here tonight. So first, I'll provide a brief overview of our tax abatement program. Sugar Land City Council has the option to offer companies property tax abatements to encourage economic development within Sugar Land. The city does not lose money through such value-added tax abatements, as the development would not have occurred without the tax abatement. The projects result in significant property tax value and revenue to the city after the abatement expires at a maximum of 10-year terms. In addition, economic growth generated by these agreements fully benefit the local school districts, as they do not participate in abatements. The process of a tax abatement agreement includes the creation of a reinvestment zone that involves a public hearing and first reading of an ordinance, and a second reading and approval of the reinvestment zone. A new requirement that came from this past legislative session includes a 30-day posting of the tax abatement agreement that for this project will post no later than December 6th. And finally, the approval of the tax abatement agreement. So about Transwestern Development Company, they develop office, industrial, multifamily, mixed-use, and healthcare projects throughout the United States. One of their current projects is to developing the TMC3 campus by the Texas Medical Center. They have also designed and completed buildings for Igloo Products Corporation, Texas Children's Hospital, several hotels, and more. Over the past 2 years, they have completed 7 buildings totaling almost 2 million square feet in Houston. This particular project includes construction of 2 spec industrial buildings that will total 326,583 square feet, and also includes an estimated capital investment of $20.8 million. TDC and the city have a negotiated tax abatement agreement that will be brought to council at a later date. The project has been reviewed by the City Council's EDC and City Council during executive session, and the reinvestment zone meets the criteria of retention and expansion of primary employment in Sugar Land. The reinvestment zone totals 20.824 acres, and as you can see on the map to the right, it is located at the northwest corner of the intersection of West Airport Boulevard and Derry Ashford Road. In order to create this reinvestment zone, a public hearing and first reading of an ordinance needs to be held, and no inquiries or comments were received prior to this public hearing. Next steps are to have a second reading and adoption of ordinance number 2183, which is scheduled for a later date this month, and City Council will consider and take action on the tax abatement agreement, which is planned for early January. With that, we will open it up for public hearing.
At this time, we're going to open the public hearing and ask that anyone in the audience that wants to speak on this item come forward, just state your name and your address. Anyone? Second call. We're going to go ahead and close the public hearing. We're going to move on to first consideration. Consideration of an action on City of Sugar Land ordinance number 2183, an ordinance the City of Sugar Land, Texas, creating reinvestment zone number 2019-03 for 20.824 acre of land located in Sugar Land, Texas, at the northwest corner of the intersection of West Airport Boulevard and Derry Ashford Road. Any questions from the council members? Steve.
Move to approve, Mayor. This has been a vacant land for a long time, and the faster we fill up our business park, the sooner we can get to work on the west side business park.
There we go. I've got a motion by Porter. I've got a second by McCutcheon. Your vote this time, please. And it passes 7-0.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, our guests. Item number 7, workshop. 7A, review of and discussion of proposed amendments to chapters 2 and 5 of the Sugar Land Development Code to comply with House Bills 2439 and 3167 as passed by the 86th Texas Legislature, our friends, and interior parking light garage lighting shielding. Lisa Kosich-Meyer, Director of Planning, and Doug Schomburg, our City Planner of Development. Doug, Lisa.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. So we have a 2-part workshop for you this evening to review some development code amendments, some that are related to some recent changes in state law as a result of the last legislative session, and then secondly, some staff recommended updates related to parking garage lighting. So I'm going to cover the state law changes. I'm going to overview the state law changes, outline the impacts and staff's approach to achieve compliance with the new law, and also review a summary of the proposed updates. And then I'm going to turn it over to Doug, and he's going to walk you through the parking garage lighting updates, overviewing our existing requirements and the proposed additions. And for each, we'll talk a little bit about next steps. So focusing on the legislative changes. So this last legislative session, there were over 7,800 bills and joint resolutions that were filed through the process. While more than 2,000 would have affected Texas cities in some substantial way, luckily only just over 330 38 city-related bills were passed. While some of them could have had negative impacts, not all of them could or did, but the city was active in opposing bills that we determined to be negatively impactful to the city. Focusing on two of the laws that actually did pass, you may have heard a reference to the shot clock bill. This was House Bill 3167, and this established a shot clock for processing and approving development applications. The second bill we'll focus on, or now law, is House Bill 2439, and this is the new law related to regulating building materials. Both of these became effective September 1st of this year, and staff has been working with our legal department and have determined that there's some amendments to our existing code, both in chapters 2 and 5, that are needed. So, focusing first on 3167, again, this is the bill that made changes to the development application and subdivision plating approval process. Through this bill, it now requires that approving plats and plans are needed to action is needed for initial approval of these applications within 30 days after the date the plan or plat is filed. It now outlines that there are and expands the options that there are for taking action to approval with conditions, or disapproval with an explanation or a reason. When there are conditions or explanations or reasons, those must be based off of existing regulations and requirements and must be cited as part of the action taken by the governing body, or the Planning and Zoning Commission in this case. Also, there's now a 15-day requirement that any review of resubmittals following the commission action must be completed. So in determining and working again with our legal department, we've determined that the law applies to the subdivision regulations of our code. And this is Chapter 5 of our development code. The types of plans and plats are listed here, and some require commission approval only, some require both commission and city council approval, and then there are some that are also handled at the administrative level. Fortunately, when we looked at the processes we have for reviewing applications, we already have processes in place that provide feedback to applicants in a timely manner, and we feel that we are meeting the intent of the law as it was changed. For example, the current process and timeline for review and feedback of plats that go through the commission review and approval process already meet the intent of the law. Once a application is deemed filed, we already had 30 days to put the item on the commission agenda and for the commission to take action. That is still achievable, and we believe that we are still currently meeting our processes meet the intent of the law. Looking at the general land plan approval process, which again is one that would go through Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council, while, again, we have 30 days once the commission takes action once the item is considered filed, we have 30 days to have that action achieved by the Planning and Zoning Commission. Under the new law, we also have an additional 30 days to present it to the City Council and for the City Council to take action. So overall, we have a maximum of 60 days from the date that the application is filed. While typically now that can take anywhere from 45 to 60 days after Planning and Zoning Commission action, several instances or typically that can be due to the fact that general land plans may be accompanied by agreements, which may be taking time to get those finalized, or the applicant themselves are making updates based on the commission approval. So we'll be working to streamline that to make sure that we can achieve the 30-day time clock. As I mentioned, overall, we feel that we are already complying with the time requirements for the most part of once an application is deemed filed, then 30 days it being placed on within 30 days being placed on the commission agenda for action. Additionally, this change also expands the options for action going forward to be approval with conditions, or disapproval with reasons. And largely, probably the biggest change may be for in our practices with, or in our application with Planning and Zoning Commission, that they must cite the statute or any code requirements for the basis for those conditions or reasons for disapproval. Identifying kind of the near-term and long-term approach to compliance with this particular law, we'll be updating or recommending updates to the development code to codify and clarify our definition of filed for types of applications. We already have a definition that we feel is advantageous to the city, and the only change would be making sure that it applies to all of our application types. Also, we want to provide the Commission with tools to aid them in their review and consideration of applications coming forward. So we would compile a list of requirements for the Commission to use as reference if they need to make apply any conditions or make any reasons for why they would disapprove an item. Also, we are always available for Commission questions, but we would ask that they contact staff with any questions or comments prior to meeting, and therefore we can then confirm that we have appropriate code references in advance that they may need to cite or want to cite. And then lastly, due to the 30-day time clock, going forward, there may be a need to have additional commission meetings in November or December. As of now, they only have one meeting due to the holidays, so there may be some additional meetings that may be required in order to meet the 30 days, but that'll be on a case-by-case basis as we go forward. And of course, we'll work with the Commission well in advance if we have something that we anticipate will be needing to have an additional meeting. Longer term, we'll continue to work with the Commission to identify any conditions in the past that there have been that may need to be incorporated into the code or our application handbook. Again, these are the sources that they would use as reference to cite any conditions or reasons for disapproval. Moving along to House Bill 2439, and again, this is the... Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
Please, sorry.
Go ahead. Questions about this particular one?
Yeah, so this is a pretty big change in terms of how a P&Z member has to provide a statement or an objection to the plat. Are we planning, and I mean, do you envision where a planning and zoning commissioner can essentially have staff basically read to them the options, or the attorney? I mean, how do you guys mechanically see this happening? Because that's what I'm struggling with to understand, is if I'm a planning and zoning commissioner and I want to make those objections, you know, do I have a chart here that I can then reference a chart and say, in accordance with such and such, or could I go to the attorney that's going to be on the dais and say, attorney, I'm making this objection, can you cite the reference? How do you guys see this working?
Sure. In our conversations, a little bit of both, but we've identified the need to maybe come up with a checklist or some type of a reference guide that the Commission can use if they need to want to make a condition or a reason. But of course, staff will be here. We'll have legal representation as well to guide them or aid them in pinpointing what the appropriate code reference might be. So absolutely, we would all kind of work together to get them the information they need to be able to make the
and just one
citation.
more. I mean, you know, and I think of if it was something like this that affected council members in the same way, I'd probably put some consideration into meeting each P&Z member individually so they're very clear about the ramifications about this. I mean, this can expose some city liability here if they don't follow these procedures properly.
Well, good news, because this is a development code amendment. It does go through P&Z.
Right.
We have workshopped with them, and they do have a public hearing on this next week. So this is not the first time they have seen it. We have met with the chair, both chairs, the assistant chairs,
Right.
and explained this to them.
Yeah.
So this is not a surprise to them. They know this is coming, and as Lisa has mentioned, there will be a chart that's created with the most common conditions that will be with staff and with the attorney, and as you go through a meeting and they add additional conditions, we'll write them down.
Yeah.
We can always recess and look something up if needed, but as Lisa had asked, we have asked them if they have questions or concerns ahead of time to notify staff so that prior to the meeting we can locate those conditions and provide them for them.
Yeah, and I guess the other part of what you talked about is with this shot clock, I think we need, as a council, really need to make sure that our planning and zoning commissioners' absences and things, quorum issues, don't come into play. So I'd like to make sure that we continue to monitor that.
Sure, absolutely. We track and we monitor that, and absolutely, if there were any issues, we would bring those forward at the appropriate time.
Thank you.
One of the things that may help, there's only 3 documents. You got development code, you got the zoning regs, and you got the comprehensive plan. It will require that the commissioners be prepared before they come to a meeting. I mean, they're not going to be able to look at it that night and be able to understand. So, preparation, discussion, I think, upfront discussion with staff to make sure that any questions they have get properly addressed, and to your point, the proper code gets cited so that when they come to the meeting, that they've already had that interaction with staff, and staff knows what the concerns are so they can address it.
Absolutely. And as staff, we will be here to assist and guide them as well during the meetings as well.
And then we can always, TML does, or the American Association of Planners?
American Planning Association.
Yeah, you guys always do a good job. It will then, we have that requirement that they should attend that. That'll become even more important because I suspect that some of the upcoming workshops will rely heavily on that kind of education. Okay. Anyone else? Steve?
There are times when we're talking about commissioners that we go back to them with questions. Are they fully grasp what they're signing up for? Since I don't have a good feel for what the increment is that we're putting on P&Z, but is it sufficient that we need to go ask them if they're willing to commit to it, or is it?
I think Steve, having done it for 8 years and a little bit after that, I think it's something that they're already charged with. Now, I think there will be there'll be an increased level of education, I think, required on their part to familiarize themselves with the individual parts of the development code, with the zoning regulations. There's only certain parts that apply.
Correct.
The comprehensive plan too, but once, I think, Lisa, you're probably going to do some of the training, you, Callaway, Doug. Once they get familiar with those components that apply, or those regs that apply, I think it'll be pretty easy.
The other thing, Mayor, to add to your comment to Steve is there should be the frequency of plats over time should be kind of going down because we're reaching ultimate build out, and unless you're doing a replat, it's you're not going to see, the frequency is not going to be that high.
Correct.
So.
Right. That was a good point, and that was one that I was going to make as well. We've slowly seen and steadily seen kind of the drop-off in the plats. Yes, and again, this is just related to the subdivision chapter and process. So this does not include the zoning process. That is outside of these changes. So, good. Yep. Just going to make.
I'm good on this part.
Okay, let's move on to 2439. And so this bill and now law, cities are limited and can't regulate building materials authorized by the national model codes that have been adopted within the last 3 code cycles. So as of 2019, the last code cycles were 2018, 2015, and 2012. We currently operate under the 2015 national codes, and there are very few or some local amendments that have occurred over time. While this bill and the language created or allowed for some exceptions for cities to be able to regulate building materials, there were very few and only one really that could apply to Sugar Land, and that is related to areas that are designated as historical, cultural, or architecturally significant areas of a city. And I'll go into a little bit more detail of how we intend to or recommend comply or apply that. Oops, sorry. So going forward, what this means for the city is that we will have a limited ability to enforce Chapter 2, which is our zoning regulations, specifically Article 10, which is the building finishes. We won't have the ability to enforce these finish requirements for non-residential buildings in our BO, B1, and B2, so business office, neighborhood business, and our general business zoning districts, or non-residential uses and buildings within the residential zoning districts. We do believe and feel that we can continue to enforce the finish requirements that were established through the planned development zoning districts, as well as our mixed-use conservation district, the MUC district, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about that as why we feel we can enforce that. But also just wanted to note that for our residential buildings and uses in our residential zoning districts and buildings in our industrial districts, we currently do not have building finish requirements in the code. So while other cities are feeling the impacts, and this would apply to us if we had them, this has not as dramatically impacted the city because we don't have these regulations in our code currently.
Lisa, question. This doesn't affect deed restrictions, correct?
Correct.
So developers can still regulate building finishes and materials through their own deed restrictions.
Right. It just limits the city's ability to enforce our regulations. Yeah. We can't enforce the private restrictions, but yes, a developer could still establish those, and they could be enforced by a property owners association or homeowners association. Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes, Steve.
Lisa, as I listen to what you're saying, would I be correct that none of this impacts our Hill engagement, whatever that we're thinking about potentially could be adopted?
Correct. We are taking the approach that right now there aren't any specific finish requirements in the Hill District. That could be an outcome of the effort that we are underway with the community. You will see, if you've had the opportunity to look at some of the draft language that's attached to the agenda item, we have incorporated the Hill District as one of those areas where we could enforce. We believe we could enforce. Again, we don't have them now, but going forward, if they are included, we didn't want to pre-assume that that would be an element that would be supported by either the community and council, but we believe that we could in the future if they are added.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Overall, we are recommending that we take an aggressive position and approach that protects the city's best interest and what we believe reflects the citizens' expectations for the high-quality development that has occurred in the city. So in terms of some of the things that we would like to see or include in our position is that we keep the text in the development code related to building finish requirements. While we recognize that it is not enforceable due to the changes in state law, however, if the law is for some reason repealed or it is deemed invalid by court proceedings, that enforcement would automatically be reinstated. And so this is additional language that we are recommending be added to the code to protect us in the event of some change. As I mentioned previously, we believe we can continue to apply finish requirements for the non-residential buildings in our MUC zoning district. And this is based off of how and the intent behind the MUC zoning district. It was established to preserve the local heritage by protecting the visual character of the built environment within this district, and which are considered significant to the history and the origin of the city. So based on this definition or intent statement of the MUC district, we believe that this meets the intent of the law going forward. For PDs, most all of the PDs have architectural requirements or specific building finishes that a developer requests in order to create a feel, an aesthetic within that development. Continuing that, we feel that we will or believe we can continue to enforce those existing PD requirements through the application process, review and approval process. And then for going forward for any new PDs that are requested, we recommend that they request those be established, an applicant or developer requests that those be established for establishing a historical, cultural, or architectural significance of their development. So again, this would be an area where we would recommend adding language to the code to specify that that is something that an applicant, a developer would need to specify as part of their application. Going forward, some other considerations that we've identified is that if there is a development agreement or some type of agreement associated with a project coming forward, we could use that as a vehicle or a tool to incorporate language about enforcing or establishing specific finish requirements. And then, as we've kind of already mentioned, potentially outreaching to our POAs or HOAs just to inform them that we now have a very limited ability to enforce our building finish requirements going forward. So they may want to take that on, or just more of an awareness so that they know they might not be able to turn to us to be able to enforce our regulations. So as Meredith mentioned, we did have the opportunity to workshop these changes and our recommended approach with the Planning and Zoning Commission in October. We received positive feedback from them, and they were supportive of the approach. We are also wanting to get these regulations or these code amendments as soon as possible. And so we have established kind of an expedited timeline for moving the review and approval through Commission and City Council. So we've have public hearings and consideration and action scheduled for the Commission meeting next week on December 10th. And then we would follow that closely with the Council's public hearing and first reading of an ordinance on December 17th, with the goal of wrapping it up at your first meeting in January 7th. Of course, all of this is pending this meeting tonight and the action of Commission, Planning and Zoning Commission, and obviously City Council in the future. Before I pass it over to Doug to go over the parking lot lighting, just wanted to pause here if there were any questions about this particular change.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question, a couple of comments. So let me give you a hypothetical. If someone has a piece of land that's not PD, that's in one of our straight zoning districts, and they are going to build an EFS building, 100%, they can now do that.
That would be correct. Under city regulations, if the only thing would be if there are private deed restrictions that might be able to regulate.
But the non-deed restricted area.
We would not be able to, as a city, say that is not allowed.
This is really bad law, and I would encourage everybody to let their state representatives know that this could change the total aesthetic look of the city. I mean, thank God we have a lot of property owner associations and deed restrictions, but there are areas that are not part of that.
That's true.
And so this could have major ramifications. So as much as we can let our state representatives know about it, I don't understand the rationale behind this, but obviously we have to deal with it. But really poor law. So.
Steve.
You talked about one of the follow-ups, which would be contacting HOAs, POAs, SAs, and letting them know the changes. We do have a lot of areas that either don't have any association, or the association is voluntary and they have no ability to control anything. Would you think about contacting them as well? And I'm not sure, I mean, this is kind of new, so I haven't thought about it much, but being able to contact them and say, if you're interested in forming something to try to protect your neighborhood, we could give you legal, not official legal advice, but what?
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman, I don't know what the practicality is of an existing subdivision creating a brand-new set of deed restrictions that everyone would agree to. Because they would literally, I'm sure there's a legal process to do something like that, but it is not, I don't think you're going to see that happen as a result of this.
You would need almost a unanimous decision.
You would need unanimous approval.
Almost unanimous of all the property owners that would be covered by it.
I mean, we're doing it potentially, we haven't done anything yet, but we're potentially going to have that happen on the Hill in terms of getting agreement for some restrictions to maintain the historical look and feel of that neighborhood. I've had other people from other neighborhoods say that we'd like to get in on that, but they're not designated historical neighborhoods or whatever. I 100% agree that it's very difficult to get people to agree to limitations.
This is the result of having a legislature that no longer respects cities.
Lisa, let's sure.
Alan, do other cities, when you have a scenario that's similar to this, can you come up with an incentive program to where you're encouraging the property owner to use what we would essentially prefer, and maybe what you do is you incentivize it with 1-year tax abatement or something, some program? Does that exist, or can that?
Yes, and we have done those sorts of things in the past here. I think you need to keep in mind that the city of Sugar Land is much better situated than most any other city that you're going to come across, for the reasons that we're largely built out. We have always relied more upon private sector deed restrictions than we have relied upon zoning to control those matters. And we have an overabundance of planned development districts as opposed to straight zoning, and we are creating a rationale whereby planned development districts are exempt. So we're really in a pretty good shape compared to others. Now, there are problems that can come, because you might have a standard building technique within an established development within the city that happened because that's the way the developer built it, but it's not contained within the deed restrictions, and somebody can now come in and build something different if the house needed to be replaced for some reason. So there are going to be negative consequences of this in other portions of the state, much more significant than here. And the state needs to stop undermining cities' ability to control their environment. That's the answer. It's not us dreaming up ways to try to work around what the state's doing to us.
Yeah, but you have to, you have to deal with it, right? And
so where you just mentioned, we can do tax abatements. We have done enhancements to architectural. We have literally negotiated approval of architectural renderings and so forth as part of economic development agreements. Right. So there are those opportunities for us.
Maybe we just need to expand.
But on a wide scale, there are going to be negative implications of this, and we're not going to be able to dream up a fix to that.
Right. No, I understand.
Lisa, why don't we create we have a land use plan. We can, I think, easily create a map of those areas that are the highest risk. Those areas without deed restrictions, those areas that we don't have much land. You got tract 5, we've got some industrial areas left. But I think that would help council members wrap their minds around what really is at risk. To Himesh's point, there are proactive things that we can do.
We can look to create that.
Yeah. Anybody? Thank you, Lisa.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Doug for the second part of the workshop.
Mayor, members of council, I'm going to keep us trucking here, kind of try to keep it somewhat brief. This is kind of part 2 of the discussion tonight on some development code work, and this is some work that we've been doing as staff to address something that we think long-term could have some real positive benefits. Essentially, parking garage lighting internally and some shielding and some structural elements that we think could be helpful. Sugar Land has lighting regulations in terms of parking lots. We've had for years some really good regulations in terms of trying to prevent glare, trying to prevent light trespass, especially when we get closer to residential neighborhoods. We got that proximity element. So those type of lights, whether it's mounted on a building outside or whether it is a light pole, are already covered in the code. We've been looking more in terms of parking lot internally with levels of parking garages, because we really don't have codes that deal with brightness there. We don't think that this is necessarily a large-scale issue, but we do believe that safeguards should be considered in placement of lighting. This is not always necessarily a light trespass issue, but it could be glare, and as we know, we can see glare from a good ways away without it necessarily lighting up the next immediate property. One of the trends we've been seeing is the use of more, I'm going to call it pendant lighting to be most simple, and that is fixtures that are hanging lower. The market and a lot of the design today, a developer may look at a parking garage and enhance that or dress that up. One of the other things that are driving that is we used to mainly see the fluorescent bulb type fixtures, and we are seeing, of course, the LEDs across the board. It's more energy efficient. There's more brightness, essentially retrofitting or brand new fixtures for a brand new development. So that is another trend that, again, is becoming more and more prominent as we go forth. This is just a simple graphic here to show how it can and cannot work. For a parking garage, this is an interior cross-section, for example, where the beams, normally the light's nested fairly high up in it, and so you don't get a lot of glare. It's more directed to the bottom. But if you have some type of pendant lighting or where the lens itself is below, again, from the outside of that garage, we're going to see more. We may see more glare with the LED type. There's a lot of different fixtures. There's a lot of different options. We're really not trying to mandate specific fixtures or get local government involved that much. We could have a new state law otherwise. But we want to look at what might be smart to do on that. And there's different ways that we can minimize some of that. One is obviously placement itself. If you've got a standard garage with the typical cross beam ceiling beams, then the old style nesting of that light can certainly reduce that, whether it's LED or whatever type. However, if you've got some kind of pendant light or a fixture, or you might have, in a few occasions, a parking garage that for the most part has a flat roof. We don't see a lot of that construction. Town Square here mostly has the prefabricated beams, but that's certainly one way to build, where you wouldn't be able to take advantage of some of those beams. If you have shielding, just like we work with on parking lot lighting, with the fixture itself. And the simplest way to put that is called full cutoff lighting, where the lens is not below the actual fixture itself. That's the way that our parking lot lights have to be now. And we only have a few grandfathered situations in town. That's been a strong provision of the city codes. So again, there's a variety of different methodologies. These are some of the more pendant style. These are just examples that the market has. In this case, here again, another one. You don't have the bulb, though, below, or the lens below, so the shielding would be there, or you might have just a standard flat type fixture. We believe it's a pretty straightforward amendment. Property owners could choose either to use the structure of a parking garage itself, or if they want to have a different kind of fixture, make sure that it's shielded so that you don't have lens that protrudes below that shielding. That's not going to screen 100% if someone is looking up, from an overpass, looking down. But again, we think this would essentially take care of a problem that we haven't fundamentally seen, but we believe we will ultimately more and more. We did work with the Planning and Zoning Commission on this. We had presented them some draft information, and I'm going to go ahead and just switch to the slide here talking about that. We workshopped it on the 10th of September. The commission feedback, one of the things that they said was, I think y'all are at least moving us kind of ahead of something that ultimately could be a lot more serious, especially with the changes in the LED fixtures and more of that possible retrofitting of existing facilities. They did suggest that we look at the possibility of wall-mounted lighting inside a garage. There's not a whole lot of that, but you could have a situation where you have a wall pack, just like we do have criteria on the outside of a wall. You could have that mounted near an elevator or something that could be a problem. We put that in, we revised the text. And they also asked us to consider a minimum amount of lighting, because parking lot lighting is there fundamentally for security and safety, to be able to get around. And they wanted to make sure that we didn't inadvertently have something where we don't have a minimum amount of light. In researching that, we also talked with our building permits and inspections department and looked at existing codes. Parking garages are less specific due to the fact they're a partially open structure as opposed to just a room in a building. But we did add in a minimum foot candle is the term, just like we do with parking lots. And we believe that will not conflict with any building lighting regulations already, but will also provide that, no matter what, a minimum amount for safety. So we scheduled and had a public hearing with the Planning and Zoning Commission, and ultimately they had a unanimous recommendation for approval on this. For this proposal, we are proposing to come back on this particular item to you in January for a hearing. Since we were covering the development code tonight, we wanted to go ahead and make you aware of it and get any feedback if there was any other from you. One of the last quick things I did want to say is that we went ahead and looked at some existing prior projects in town. We've had some great projects that have had some garage plans that were pretty detailed. We wanted to see how any of this might be, see if we were in alignment with that. And we found that essentially with a lot of the new designs and, again, what's going on with plans and photometric plans, that these are in alignment with what, for the most part, we're seeing. So we're not trying to create a regulation that'll be difficult to comply with, but we do feel that long-term it'll be a good approach.
Direction from council. Steve?
Question, we wouldn't be asking anybody to retrofit, right? This would all be prospective new development?
We would have for new development, or if a parking garage was completely replacing all their lighting in that case, but not repairing something or that type of thing.
Okay,
No, that's
thank you.
correct. It's not retroactive.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Thank you, Doug. At this time, we're going to have a 15-minute recess, and we're going to reconvene in the Kane Room for another workshop. So, going right on. 15 minutes, yeah?
Pretty generous, Mayor. Very generous.
Yes, sir.
Is that something that the city has dealt with general
here? On audio? Well, I will tell you this.